The definition of marriage in America is now in the hands of 9 unelected Supreme Court justices. After a marathon session Tuesday, the court will now decide if it will honor the will of voters in states across the nation or impose same-sex marriage on the entire country. As Paul Strand reports, the key swing vote may be balking at this latest case.
Whenever the justices hear a case dealing with same-sex marriage, partisans on both sides fill the Supreme Court plaza with signs and colorful costumes and lots of yelling at each other.
Jesus loved the sinners, and we're loving you just like Jesus loved the Pharisees. We're telling you to turn. God will not hear your prayers. God does not hear the prayers of the wicked.
You see Orthodox Jews condemning homosexual activity, while pro-gay Jews protest against the Orthodox Jews with signs and songs. All of this effort in the hope of pushing the Supreme Court one way or the other as it mulls these 4 cases rolled into one that could decide whether same-sex marriage is imposed on the entire nation.
What's interesting is whether any of these demonstrators outside or even the lawyers inside will have any effect on the justices. Some analysts say that already 4 on each side of the argument have made up their minds, leaving Anthony Kennedy once again as a swing vote to decide this crucial question: should all 50 states have to recognize same-sex marriage?
The attorney who argued on behalf of the states thinks Kennedy might be leaning towards letting the states and the people decide rather than the justices.
And he said this is the marriage definition that we've had for millennia. How are we in a position that we can decide better than everybody else in the history of the world?
But the attorney leading the charges for national gay marriage said to the justices if they rule against it,
you are constitutionalizing a second-class status for gay and lesbian people. You are endorsing that the families are deficient and inferior.
This lesbian couple contends the nation's ready for gay marriage, except for a misguided few.
People not really understanding that we're just like everybody else because someone somewhere had taught them something different.
And it's hard to feel bad when you know you're right.
But a leading Southern Baptist Convention official disagrees.
The states have spoken on this, and when the people have spoken, they've said they believe that only marriage is a union between a man and a woman.
And Barrett Duke says God sees it that way too.
God defined marriage as a union of one man and one woman. Regardless of what humans decide to do about that, it doesn't change what marriage really is, and the Supreme Court should leave the definition that God has given us alone.
This rabbi warns if the government forces gay marriage on the whole country, it will be an official rebellion against God.
We plead with our government leaders, we plead with our judges, we plead with our fellow people. Let's remember there's a God on the universe. Let's remember there's one ruling us all. Let's remember there is one giving us air to breathe and keeping us alive.
Former lesbian, now pro-life activist Lauren Handy says nationwide government-backed gay marriage will in its way hurt America as much as the court legalizing abortion.
1973 legalized abortion, 1/3 of my generation gone, and so if the court decides in their favor, it's going to be just like that.
That's the kind of hot and heavy emotion same-sex marriage brings out on the Supreme Court plaza.
But inside the court, it's all about the argument. Should the states have the right to decide this, or should the court say all 50 states must recognize gay marriage from this point on? Decision probably comes out in late June. Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from the Supreme Court.
And joining us now with more is Brad Jacob, Associate Professor at the Regent University School of Law. Well, let's get right into it. Do you think we're on the verge of a landmark ruling like Roe versus Wade, as we heard in the piece?
Well, it depends on what you mean by a landmark ruling. Who knows in 10 years whether this case will make much of a difference in terms of marriage. Public opinion is changing. The states may implement same-sex marriage if they want to. This is really a question about federal power, and it's about, is the Supreme Court going to force social change on those parts of the country that aren't going there at this point?
All right. Well, we know that Justice Kennedy has written every Supreme Court decision so far that's pushed the gay agenda forward. He could be the swing vote in this again. What do you think he'll do in this case? Any prediction?
I have no clue. I'm neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet. And Justice Kennedy has sent conflicting signals, both in oral argument yesterday and in the Windsor case, the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, which was the last big gay marriage case. Kennedy sent signals for both sides. At one point, in the DOMA case, he said that marriage is a state issue. Marriage should be defined by the states. It's not a federal issue. And at another point, he talked about denying gays and lesbians a fundamental right. So which side of Kennedy comes through when he actually votes and presumably writes an opinion? I can't tell you today.
Wow. Well, if the Supreme Court rules in favor of a constitutional right to gay marriage, how could that affect ministries and religious businesses that don't believe in this?
Well, we're already seeing cases around the country in places where there is same-sex marriage, where a Christian who bakes wedding cakes or prints announcements or rents out a hall for receptions may violate state law or local law if they don't want to promote a gay ceremony. This could go even further. If the Supreme Court finds some kind of fundamental right, then any religious institution, Regent University, where I work, could find ourselves in legal trouble if we don't acknowledge gay relationships as being the equivalent of husband-wife marriages. It could have huge, huge consequences.
Real quickly, if the court does decide that gays do have a right to marriage, what do you think that says to states, especially where voters have decided that that's not what they want in their state?
Well, it's an issue of making the states change what marriage is, fundamentally redefine, because marriage has always been based on that complementarity. As of today, only 11 states have chosen to enact same-sex marriage. But if the Supreme Court says it's a constitutional right, we'll have it in all 50. That means 39 states will have the will of the people overturned.
Indeed. Brad Jacob, thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated.